Good morning, everyone. It's me again, and so I wanted to get on this weekend and give everybody a review of the content that we covered this week and talk about a few of the questions that I've been asked throughout the week. And there really haven't been too many questions, honestly, which I'm pleased with. Either one, that means that everybody pretty well understood the content for this week, which in an online class can be really difficult sometimes. Or two, it means that maybe there's just some questions out there that haven't been asked yet. And so hopefully with this video I can kind of alleviate some of those questions. And so the first things first, you come to this website and the Blackboard and the course content, you should only be able to get into one folder, so it really shouldn't be too hard to find that this week. And no one's asked the question, so I assume everyone's gotten in. So week one, in a few minutes here I'm going to go through and respond to all the discussion questions and everything, but before that I wanted to kind of go over this, the ethos, pathos, logos, purpose, audience, genre, and then the reflective narrative itself. One question that I was asked this week was regarding the timeline of actually doing the reflective narrative. The reflective narrative isn't due this week, and really not even the draft is even due this week. The draft itself is due next Friday on the 28th, and that's just the rough draft. I mentioned it before, but the rough draft is only going to be, well, just as it sounds, your rough draft. It's going to have errors, and as long as you just meet the minimum length requirements and you do everything that you're trying that's required of the actual assignment, then you'll get 100% on the rough draft. The only way you wouldn't get 100 on the rough draft is if you, one, don't meet the minimum page requirements, 3 or 4 pages, or you don't meet the standards for a reflective narrative. Now, real briefly, the reflective narrative itself is just a story that you're telling that has a moral at the end of it. And I'll go into more of that in just a second. I wanted to go through all the other parts of the lesson first and then follow up at the end with the reflective narrative. So just to answer those questions, no rough draft or no essays really due this week. The only thing that's really due this week is down here at the bottom, the homework, the week 1 homework, the rhetorical strategies. Your job is to answer these questions. And so I'm going to go through and kind of explain most of it again. But if you haven't done this week's homework, still this needs to be in your own words, so hopefully this video will kind of help those people out a little bit. The only thing that's really due for the reflective narrative is a little bit of brainstorming, which is answered in these last 2 questions. What social issue will be the subject of your reflective narrative, and what personal life experience, sorry, the camera's in the way, will I use as the topic of my narrative? And so those 2 things are really the only part of the project that are due this week. Next week we'll kind of go into thesis writing and rough draft, and the big project or the big homework assignment for next week will actually be the rough draft. So if you've already started the rough draft, good for you, you're ahead of the game, but you don't need it this week. So let's go back up and talk a little bit about ethos, pathos, and logos. So this video has a lot of good stuff with Ari and his mom trying to get pizza and things like that, but it's really basic. It doesn't really tell you how to apply this concept to your actual paper. One thing, I mean, a real brief overview of ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is that ethical appeal. So if you're trying to get someone to believe what it is you're saying or take on your position, or if you're writing a paper and you're trying to persuade them of whatever claim you're making, then you're using an ethical appeal in the fact of you are knowledgeable on the subject. Maybe you're giving a lot of information and it's building credibility for you, and that's building an ethical appeal because it makes you believable because people think you know what you're talking about. If someone thinks that you're making stuff up or you don't know anything about the topic, then people are going to think that you don't know what you're talking about, and that damages your credibility, and therein damages your overall persuasion, the paper itself. So let's see. If you were to use, let's make up a topic. Let's say that we're doing a persuasive paper, or let's say we're doing a reflective narrative on, let's do police brutality again, because that's such big in the media right now, at least where I'm at. I'm in Illinois, just east of St. Louis, so the Ferguson riots are still pretty prominent here. Maybe not rioting anymore, but they're still in the news. So if you were to do a reflective narrative on police brutality, that would be you telling a story about yourself and how you've experienced some event that has to do with police brutality. Maybe you're walking down the road, a cop pulls up beside you and just all of a sudden gets out of the car and pushes you to the ground and puts you in handcuffs and says you did something without ever, asking you or having any evidence of doing that. Police brutality. So if you're giving that rhetorical, if you're writing your reflective narrative on this particular topic, you're giving me a story where you've done that, and you explain the story to me, and at the end of it, you're kind of telling me how is this event shaped or molded or at least affected your life in some form or fashion. Now, using ethos, it's going to be different using ethos, pathos, and logos depending on what type of essay you're writing. Now we're writing a reflective narrative, but we might later on be writing an analytical essay, a synthesis essay, and an analysis essay. So all of those essays are all things that are going to use ethos, pathos, and logos differently. So again, going back to ethos on my side tangent, ethos in your reflective narrative is going to be your story. It's you telling about this event and having knowledge about the social issue. If you're talking about police brutality, but then you go on and you talk about in your story how the police interrogated you for a murder, well, that's their job. If they think you committed murder, then they're going to do that. So whenever you're using ethos, you want to make sure that everything you say is truthful, everything you say makes you seem knowledgeable. And so whenever you're describing police brutality in a reflective narrative, it would be you talking about what real police brutality is and telling your story, and then after that comparing it maybe to outside events in social contexts that are happening. Maybe you reference Ferguson, maybe you reference Baltimore, things like that, and you use those to kind of back up your credibility. Now, if you were to use ethos in another sense, maybe you did a persuasive essay. Maybe you're doing a research-based essay, and you're doing research on, let's say, the effects of alcoholism in adolescents. Maybe you're talking about high school students who drink, and you're looking at the effects. Well, whenever you're doing research-based essays and you're using ethos, you're using knowledge and using research to kind of build your credibility. You're talking about how you're not being biased against alcoholism in adolescents just because it's illegal. Sure, that is a good point, but you're not looking at how alcoholism is illegal, you're looking at how it affects adolescents. And so in looking at how it affects adolescents, you're in essence looking at how it affects adolescents compared to adults or compared to later in life adults. And so you have those three categories, and if you say, alcoholism is bad as a teenager because it's illegal, and that's all of your evidence, well, you clearly don't know anything about alcoholism because you only have 1 point. And so that's kind of you looking at it in a fair light because you're saying, I don't worry about it being illegal. All I want to know is how does it affect these adolescents compared to how it affects adults. And that right there is being fair and being unbiased. That's what you're trying to do in a persuasive essay. Again, we're not writing a persuasive essay. I just want to give you those examples to show you how they differ between different types of writing. So let's see, what else do they talk about? Pathos is unique because what you're dealing with here is emotional appeal, and you're using it in such a manner as to make the person feel like you do. You want to get on the same level and appeal to them in such a manner that they think, oh yeah, I agree with this guy, I like this guy, I want to agree with him because he has, the same beliefs as me. You see this a lot with the presidency debate. My wife, sadly enough, is really fighting for Trump, which is, really strange to me, but nonetheless, you have people like Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and most people apply or subscribe to their candidacy because they think or they have similar beliefs as the individual. So let's say that I'm running for president. One of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to use pathos or emotional appeal by getting everyone to believe, I believe like you do. I share the same beliefs as you, so you should act on what I'm trying to get you to do. In this case, vote for me for president. In a more realistic perspective, let's think about it from the idea of you're writing a paper, and in the reflective narrative, what is your goal? Think about that for a second. What is the goal of a reflective narrative? Why are you telling a story? Well, at the end of the day, you're telling the story so that you can communicate a moral to someone else so that they don't make the same mistake that you make, or that they do the exact same thing you did so that they can reap the same benefits. For instance, if you tell a story about how you went to school and how it changed your life, well, you want people to go to school and change your life. Otherwise, why would you be telling the story? Or, the other end of the spectrum, if you don't want people to use alcohol in high school, you talk about a story that you had and how it negatively affected your life, and therefore the purpose of your essay is to get them to do whatever it is you want them to do. And so that's how emotional appeal comes into play, is in a reflective narrative, you want them to be able to understand what it is that you are saying. You want them to be able to relate to your story. You don't want to talk about, in working class America, you don't want to write an essay about how rich you were and how you didn't know what to do with all of your finances, and so you mistakenly invested all of it in a Roth IRA rather than a traditional, because majority of the people that you're writing these essays to are not going to understand that, and so they can't relate to it, and so your pathos there is really being damaged, and thereby your persuasion is being damaged, and in the end of it, your entire essay is being damaged. Moving on to logos. Logos is really quite straightforward. Logos, he talks about in this video how Ari here, little kid, is talking to his mom, and he uses logos in the manner of, it's going to be healthy for us, it could be healthy for us, and it talks about the benefits from an objective point of view. What are the benefits, the logical benefits of eating pizza tonight? And typically the way you're going to see this in essays is physical evidence. It's going to be charts, graphs, statistics, things like that. But also, think about the name. It's logos. It's a logical appeal. So if you're making an argument based on 3 steps of an argument, of a logical argument, then that too is logos. Let me give you an example. Let's say that we have a fire. There is a fire, and I walk you through how to put that fire out. Step 1, grab the extinguisher. Step 2, point the extinguisher at the fire. Step 3, squeeze the trigger and it'll shoot the fire. And then my logic, my logos, my logical persuasion is those steps. They are those steps. But then more so, my logical argument is me telling you how this is going to benefit you. The logic behind using these 3 steps is that you're going to put the fire out, and once that fire is out, then you can put water on it, and then you can, if it's an electrical fire, of course, and then you can call anyone who you need to call in order to correct things. If there's been injury, call the ambulance. And it's my path of logical argumentation that I'm trying to lead the reader down. Let's see, what's another example of this? If I was trying to, let's imagine that I'm writing an essay where I'm trying to persuade you to vote for I guess Trump, and let's say that I'm trying to get you to vote for Trump because I think he can end world hunger. I'm going to walk you through my argumentation logically by saying, if we vote for Trump, he's going to do this. He's going to increase the spending money of our working class. Once he does that, he's then going to, that spending money from the working class is then going to be pumped back into the economy. The economy will build up, the corporations will build up. That money can then be sent, the companies will have extra money, therefore they'll donate to public service organizations, charity organizations that help kids in Africa. And so thereby, my logical argumentation, my steps would be, vote for Trump. Step 2, Trump will put money into the economy. Step 3, economy builds corporations. Step 4, corporations have more money, therefore they donate. Step 5, donation money goes to public service and charities that work for world hunger. And step 5 or 6, or wherever I am, that money then goes to Africa and feeds starving children. So that is logical argumentation. That's logos. It's me walking you through the steps of how my train of thought is being processed and how it will turn out to be the better way of thinking. And it's just a logical way of going about that. So that's ethos, pathos, and logos. In a reflective narrative, logos is going to be more so at the end whenever you're talking about how the story and the event in that story affected your life. I need you to walk me through, why is it that if you suffered from police brutality and now you're saying that police brutality affected your schooling, and so therefore police need to be put in check, how do those two link? Because just because it's police brutality doesn't mean that everyone's schooling is always going to be messed up. So how are you linking those two, that story to your point? You have to have logical argumentation to link them together. Let's do another one because that one's not very clear. Logos, let's say we were writing our essay on, let's do bullying because that one's pretty easy. Let's say that in our essay, our thesis talks about, I was bullied I was bullied in elementary school, and that led me to being highly introverted in high school, and those two events led me to being overly shy when I was an adult, and therefore I couldn't get a job, something like that. You're kind of reaching out there. But nonetheless, that's what Logos does. Logos links those three together and shows how one is a cause that led to another effect, or to one effect, and then that effect was the cause for a second effect. And so how do you link those two together? Well, logical progression would say I was bullied in middle school, therefore I became shy, and I guess that's kind of what I just said, but I became shy in middle school, and then once that shyness came around, I got bullied even more in high school for being the quiet, nerdy kid or something like that, and I'm making this up, or am I? maybe this really happened. And then in high school, I became more introverted at high school, and when I graduated, maybe that caused me not to have a whole lot of friends, and so through not having friends, I didn't have very good networking skills, and therefore, without networking, I was unable to get a job. Well, that logical progression from middle school to adulthood and not being able to get a job, that's Logos. That's you giving me logical argumentation, because otherwise it would be me saying, I got bullied in middle school, therefore I couldn't get a job. But those two together don't really link, so you need to have that logical progression that kind of links A to B, otherwise it's not going to make sense for the reader. The reader's not going to understand. Let's see, so going on to purpose, audience, and genre. The thing here, and this is really pretty simple, the reason there's two videos is because I really just wanted you to understand what purpose, audience, and genre were for, but again, they don't really talk about what are they used for. Well, purpose, I suppose we've just kind of touched on that a second ago with ethos, pathos, and logos, but the purpose of an argument, I mean, as I say right here, to inform, persuade, or entertain. But let's think about that more particularly to our paper. You have a purpose. Your reflective narrative is to do, well, a couple things. You're persuading the person of what effects this particular event had on your life, sure. But at one point, excuse me, something on my tongue. You're also trying to inform them of the story. So there might be multiple purposes throughout the smaller parts of the essays, throughout the sections, but think about it more collectively. At the end of the day, whenever someone reads your paper, what is the purpose of that paper? Are you trying to get them to do something that you want them to do? Are you wanting them to learn something? Are you wanting them to just have a story to read? And I'll tell you, for the reflective narrative, you're trying to persuade them into believing that this event had some sort of effect on your life. And the moral of the story then would be, everyone should avoid being bullied, or, well, I guess that wouldn't really make sense. Everyone should not be a bully, or everyone should do something to stop bullying in their classrooms, or whatever it might be. Think about that before you start writing. What is the overall purpose? Sure, it's to persuade, but what are you trying to persuade them of? Are you trying to persuade them to believe something that you believe? Are you trying to persuade them to take an action of some kind? Are you trying to persuade them to maybe just, maybe listen? That's still an action. So it really comes down to actions and beliefs. I can't think of anything else. Sure, there's probably something, but what are you trying to persuade them of? That's going to be your purpose. And I can tell you most of the essays, if not all of the essays in this semester, are going to be persuasive primarily. And if that changes, I'll go over that in the week's intro. Audience, this one is probably, I hate to say the most important, but it's definitely one of the most important, because audience caters how you talk to the reader. Granted, everyone's reader is going to be me, but that's not what I want you to think about. When I ask you, who are you writing this essay to? Don't say me. I mean, sure, you're writing it to me, but I'm just grading it. I'm grading it as if I was who I think your real audience is. So let's say that you're writing about, let's say that you're writing to get the government to give money to give tax credits to parents who have children who do babysitting. So you're saying, because taxes don't come out and babysitting, because most of the time that's under the table, so to speak. If a girl comes here, babysits my daughter, and then I pay her, I usually don't take taxes out of it. And I guess I do claim it on my taxes, but typically she's not going to, and her parents won't. But nonetheless, what I'm trying to get at here is that I want the government to give her a subsidy. Or maybe what I'm trying to do, let's say that I'm writing to a group of babysitters, and I'm trying to get them to back me in sending a letter to the government saying we need to give these kids, these kids' parents, tax breaks. So let's say that we're doing that, and I'm talking to 35 younger girls, and I'm talking about how I'm telling them about my perception on these tax breaks and how I want them to support me in writing this letter to the government to get these actual tax breaks done. Let's think about that for a second. If I'm writing to 16-year-old girls, am I really just going to get into the nitty-gritty of taxes? Because they probably don't understand what I'm talking about, especially if they're younger than 18 or however old you have to be to do taxes. I guess 16. But nonetheless, if we're doing that, think about who your audience is and how you need to address them. Because you wouldn't want to go in there talking about all these taxes. However, what you would want to do is talk about, what if the government came and decided they wanted to tax you on all the babysitting money that you gained this year, or you earned this year. You need to think about that audience, because you need to figure out how you're going to address them. Because if they don't understand what you're saying, then they don't understand your paper, and your paper's pointless. What's the point of writing a paper if the audience that you're trying to get at, you're trying to persuade, doesn't understand your paper? Then you're not persuading anybody, and you're just wasting your time writing a few pages of nothing, really, because it's not going to achieve any purpose. And that's really, going back to the purpose then. Purpose, audience, and genre. Now, genre, I think, if I had to claim one as the least important, I would probably say it's genre, but that doesn't mean it's, it's not still important. Genre here is how are you going to cater the genre of the paper to address the audience and to address the purpose. If we're talking to those 15-year-old girls, is it going to be more beneficial to, maybe we're doing a reflective narrative. Maybe we're doing this reflective narrative, we're going to read it to these 35 girls, and the moral of the story is that we need to give tax breaks to parents of babysitting young women. Fine, kind of complex, but nonetheless. Is it going to be more beneficial to talk to these girls and give them a reflective narrative, which is basically a story? Is it going to be easier to give them a story that's a romance, or is it going to be more effective to give them a story that's like an action? Granted, I'm stereotyping there. I'm assuming gender-wise, these females are going to appreciate the romance, but stereotypically that's correct. And statistically speaking, we look at books like Twilight, and we look at books like The Hunger Games. What do the young girls like? They like the romance of it, and the love story. So if we want to persuade them, we might consider doing a romance. Now, with the genre of our reflective narrative. Now, I mean, granted, we're talking about taxes, so you can't really get too romantic with a tax story. But nonetheless, that's what I'm talking about when you consider genre. Consider genre in light of the audience. Consider the audience in light of the purpose, because the purpose is your main goal. In order to achieve this purpose, you have to address your audience correctly, and in order to address your audience correctly, you need to choose a proper genre. And so that's how these things work together, along with ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos, pathos, and logos more so goes into it whenever you're writing your argument, and the purpose, audience, and genre is more the planning and more the structuring. And so that's going to be the end of this video, because it's getting kind of long, and then I'm going to make a second video here in just a second that goes over the Writing Project 1 guidelines just one more time to kind of address some questions I had. But if there are any questions, I'm going to, in the start here, I'm going to actually right now open up a discussion board for general questions. So if there are any questions, and you can kind of see what the instructor side looks like, and this might be helpful for everyone if you're looking at the screen right now. I'll just call it general questions for the course. And so here, you can ask any question about regarding any week of the course. how about here? Here you can ask any question regarding any week of the course. Questions will be addressed within the discussion board, and I will also address them via video responses. That way, I mean, I'm just assuming you listened to what I just said. I wasn't really listening, but I'm saying it, so it works. These questions, they'll be addressed to the discussion board. So in the discussion board, once you post these questions, I'm going to go in there and answer them for everyone to read. Also, after that, at the end of the week, like I'm doing this video at the week's end, I will address these questions at the end of the week as well. Now, Monday, I'm also going to post another video explaining, kind of reviewing week 2. And so if there's any more questions, I'll address those there. Basically, when I get them, I post videos on Monday and Friday. If I get a question on Sunday, I'll address it on Monday. If I get a question on Wednesday, I'll address it on Friday. Obviously, can't go back in time and address the other ones prior to you actually asking the question. Enter dates, so I'm not going to restrict that. There won't be a grade for this one, and I think that's it. So I'll post that right now. And general questions. That's squishy questions. Okay, so let's submit that. And I'll move this up to the top. Maybe. There we go. So, general questions. If we were in student view, you'll come to the start here. And up the top, general questions for the course, you'll create a thread and you just type your question. You might title it, you know, whatever question I'm asking. And then here, you know, Mr. Lee in class, does anyone know where I left my keys? Oh, cats. Does anyone know where I left my cats? It's kids. It's English for kids. Lost my kids. Thanks. So then you would submit it. I'm not going to submit it because then it'll actually submit it under a weird name and then it'll confuse everybody. So nonetheless, that's how you submit a question. And again, I will address it here. I'll respond to it and then I'll address it via the video as well. So that's it for this video. I'm going to come back in a few minutes here and post you another video on the reflective narrative and kind of go through that just a little bit more. Thanks.